Well, in this little video, we're going to talk about the portfolio assignment. The portfolio is an assignment you're going to be doing all year long. And to give it a synonym, another way to actually imagine it, the portfolio is basically a scrapbook. You're going to be creating a visual reference point for all these lessons that you have learned throughout the year, for all those notes you've taken, all of those stories you've heard, all those ideas you've written down, and those little bits of wisdom and quotations that you have recorded and have tried to think through. The portfolio is meant to be a visual reference point for those. In other words, you're essentially creating your very own textbook for this course. Now, the portfolio assignment, which you're going to be doing for every single lesson. So since there's 13 lessons in the first semester, that means you should have 13 portfolio entries. And I'll tell you in just a moment how those entries should actually look, but there's two key things that you should keep in mind as you do this project. The first is craftsmanship. You want your portfolio to reflect excellence. You want to reflect your own pursuit of excellence, and therefore, these should be done really well. We're going to see the exact same principle at work with the projects. You want this to be something that you actually want to show others, something you're actually pleased with at the end of it, and you can flip through it and see a whole year's worth of lessons or a whole semester's worth of lessons. The second thing you really need to be going for with these portfolios or these scrapbooks is ownership. If you actually do this well, I want these portfolios to be something that you want to keep, something that you realize is really a labor of love for you, something that you have really poured yourself into. So to make these portfolios, the very first thing you're going to have to do is you need to go and find either a scrapbook or a high-quality sketchbook of some kind, or even perhaps a 3-ring binder, so long as it's neat and it doesn't have like some leftover stickers from previous classes or previous conferences, or even an old-style photo album, something that has nice big pages that you can put lots of things on, whether you adhere them with glue or tape, it doesn't really matter. But with your portfolio, one of the very first things you're going to be making is you need to make a title page for the entire year. If you just want to put American history on there, that's fine. But it needs to be something that when someone opens up this book, they know immediately what this thing actually is. So it needs to have a title page. And I recommend you don't just write American history. I recommend you write by and then put your name in there. So you've actually taken ownership. It'd even be helpful to put the date, whatever year or whatever period of months you're actually doing this class over. As far as the content goes, for each and every entry, there's several things you can do. For one, you can simply insert pictures to represent, say, the people we've talked about, like Abraham Lincoln or Sam Adams or Patrick Henry. Or you can put pictures in there that represent the events we have discussed, whether it be the Boston Massacre or the landing of the Mayflower, or perhaps the conquest of the Aztecs. It doesn't really matter. Whatever we're talking about, you need to find some kind of visual reference for that. So you can simply find pictures, whether they be from old magazines, or whether you make copies or you print them from online. Either one of those is fine. You just want to make sure that they're in there. You can also do other things. For example, you could find poetry or even craft your own poetry that somehow exhibits the lessons and the events and the people and the ideas that we've talked about. You could include song lyrics that directly relate to the things we've talked about. You could include snippets from articles you have read that relate to the ideas or the people or the events that we have discussed. You could even do original artwork. In fact, it's one of my favorite things that I often see students do. They will often go home and they will sketch some person or event that we have discussed and then use that for their portfolio entry. Beyond that, you could include quotes from the people we have discussed or quotes about the things that we have discussed. You could even include advertisements that somehow relate directly to what we have discussed. In other words, your imagination is kind of the limit, so long as whatever you pick fits and connects directly to what we have actually discussed. Now, for each entry that you do, for each lesson, it needs to have a few things besides that content that I just described for you. For one, it needs to have a title. So make certain that you have a title. You can just use the title that I gave for the actual lesson. So if the lesson is called The Banner of the Sun, you can just title that entry The Banner of the Sun. And then it'd be helpful to put the topic below that. Oh, this is about Mesoamerica, or this is about the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Inca, for example. But also, for each bit of content, for each picture, for each poem or each quote, but especially for the pictures, it'd be extremely helpful to have a caption in there. Something to explain what it is that the person is looking at. Because after all, this isn't just for you. It's meant to be kind of a visual reference for others to see as well, almost as a way to explain what you've been doing in school this year. So when people ask you, like at Thanksgiving, hey, what are you doing in school? You could actually show them this, especially your grandparents or your aunts and uncles, for example. The other thing that I want to point out to you is as far as content goes, you really need to have at least 3 different items in there. So for example, I have some portfolios here. I have one by a student who got a nice big blue scrapbook here, made a title page, as you'll be able to see perhaps. And also, for each entry, she has simply found at least 3, if not more, images to put in here. The student has selected nice background pages. The student has also included quotes, parts of their notes from the classes, and so forth, so that this thing really is almost like a little textbook, but it's a textbook that you actually want to look at, not a textbook that is rather dull. So anyway, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, like I said, if you want to do original artwork, instead of doing 3 individual shots, you may just want to do 1. So here, for example, when we had our study on the Colossus of Empire and discoveries and things like that, the student chose to do a compass drawing. Or, for example, John Cabot, when we talked about explorers and the Reformational colonies. Or perhaps a picture here of the Mayflower. In other words, these original artwork drawings, since they take more time, it might be more appropriate just to do 1 item per entry. But that's all right. In that case, you're really taking ownership over the portfolio because you've made something that is your own. Now, in addition to all these requirements I've given you, make sure that whatever paper you use for this, if it be a scrapbook or especially if it's a 3-ring binder where you're inserting your own paper, make certain the paper is of a good quality. Something that is rather thick, like cardstock, would be appropriate. You don't want to be using notebook paper, you don't want to be using anything with lines on it, and you certainly don't want to be using copy paper. It needs to be something of high quality, so when people feel it, they actually feel like, oh, somebody thought through what's going into this portfolio, and it just wasn't done on the fly. 3 more things I'll leave you with as a way to understand how to do the portfolio. First of all, make it neat. If you're printing off pictures online, that's fine. Just make sure that when you cut them out, they actually look neat when they're cut out. They don't have all of these little bits of paper flying off in different directions, or they don't have little bits of white around the picture that wasn't actually trimmed. Make it neat. It's often very helpful to take those pictures and then mount them on maybe a colorful piece of paper that kind of provides a border around it, and then put that on top of whatever your base paper is. Little details like that will really help the presentation of your portfolio. In fact, that's one of the primary things I grade my students on when I grade these portfolios, is I try to see how much should they consider the presentation or how the whole thing looks. Secondly, you need to make this visual. This needs to be something that people actually want to look through, something that's actually intriguing. So make sure you have a good variety in there. In fact, that's the third thing, to make it varied. Try to put lots of different things in there. Maybe a few quotes, maybe a few pictures, maybe some maps, maybe an advertisement that relates, or a collection from an article, or even your original artwork, as I mentioned before. But all of those things, if you really kind of pour yourself into this, really fill up the page with lots of things to look at. And you can make your own borders, you can make your own backgrounds, you can even make your own cutouts. I've had students do 3-dimensional portfolios where they almost have like little pop-out art, or they have a little book that they've made when we're talking about, say, the Reformation and the study of literature or something like that. But they'll put those in their portfolios that just makes them so intriguing to look at. So really, your imagination is basically the limit. Your creativity is the limit as to how excellent you want to make this portfolio. But make certain you do make it excellent.